the impact of this decision. It certainly feels like a big one, not necessarily totally surprising, but nonetheless, when it came down, it made us all kind of sit up and take note. What do you see as the big impact of this decision?
I think the impact of the decision, one, besides giving relief to every business in this country and providing for the end of tariffs, it reaffirms the separation of powers and our Constitution. And that's what this case was about. It wasn't about tariffs. It was about who has the power to levy tariffs.
And yet we have President Trump now pursuing multiple different options under different laws that could allow him to potentially introduce new tariffs. How concerned are you about that we would potentially just see a different form of essentially the same type of charge that we saw last year?
Right. I think the big difference is the uncertainty is gone. And so you were talking about the VIX earlier, and I think that's perhaps, stable because they now know the playbook. The playbook is 122, 201, 301, 232. Those are all well-established statutes that provide for tariffs with very strict guidelines and rules that the president has to follow. So now that we know what we're dealing with, I think that gives everybody a lot of relief versus IEEPA, where it was any amount on any country for any reason for any length of time.
So it sounds like, Sara, that you're not concerned that Congress might come back now and pass similar tariffs.
I mean, I think if they do, it will be very well thought out and justified and with reason and have guardrails. So IEEPA didn't allow for any guardrails. And I think the tariff statutes that exist that have been used for a number of years by almost every president have rules that they have to follow. So if Congress wants to do that, I don't think I'm not going to say what I think Congress is going to do.
Tell us a little bit about the background of how you brought yourself to this case, because I think a lot of listeners might not realize that the decision that the Supreme Court made today was based off of a case that was essentially family-owned businesses versus the president. And so you represented those family-owned businesses. Tell us just about the background a little bit so that we can zoom out and know really what's going on.
Liberty Justice Center is a nonprofit, and our mission is defending the Constitution for all Americans. When President Trump authorized tariffs using the IEEPA statute, it struck us as an abuse of power and did not provide for tariffs. And it seemed very obvious that this was not constitutional. So as a nonprofit, we then went out and searched for plaintiffs that we could represent versus a typical law firm that the plaintiffs would walk in the door. We went out to find the plaintiffs, and we found 5 wonderful family small businesses to represent and really speak for all businesses in the United States. And we filed in the right court, which the Supreme Court also said and affirmed today, the Court of International Trade, and then Federal Circuit, and then today sitting in the Supreme Court was an amazing end to an amazing journey. And I'm so thankful to our team and to Neil Katyal, who argued the case for us, and our clients who, in addition to trying to manage the tariffs and their businesses, then were the named plaintiffs in a very big lawsuit, which comes with a whole other set of challenges.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Hey, one of the things, though, that certainly stood out, and, the president addressed this in a press conference from the White House earlier today, and he talked about the tariff refunds has to be litigated for 2 years. That was his perspective weighing in on this. The Supreme Court did not take that up. They did not decide on how businesses should be refunded and sent it back to the lower courts. How do you plan to pursue that? Because I think it's safe to say it still leaves companies in limbo a little bit as we wait to see what else might come down from the president and whether or not they get these refunds.
Right. And it's not really the court's role to decide how those refunds are implemented, the Supreme Court's role. So if you go back to the Court of International Trade, when we filed and won that case in May of 2025, the ruling came out and they granted us a permanent injunction against the tariffs, saying that they were unconstitutional and that businesses should not be required to pay them and should be required to be refunded. So the government then immediately asked for that injunction to be set aside, which the court granted. And the government's rationale for asking that and why the court agreed to it was the government said we can always just refund the money. So that is in their briefs, that is in writing, and I think they need to stand by that. I think the court will then go back to the permanent injunction, remove the stay, which will allow refunds to go back to small businesses. The CBP also just implemented a automatic refund mechanism, so ACH transfers, which they've never had before, are now automatically. So if you signed up for that program, it should make the whole process a lot simpler. And the fact is, CBP has always issued refunds on all the different tariff statutes, so they know how to do it. It's just doing it.
I just want to, before you go, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent weighed in on all of this. We know we heard from the president as well, but here's the Treasury Secretary earlier at the Economic Club of Dallas, just reminding us that, at least from the White House's perspective, this isn't done yet. Unfortunately, he did speak, but there's no audio there.
I believe he said that.
Yeah, but he talked about invoking alternative legal authorities to replace the IEEPA tariffs. He talked about leveraging Section 232, Section 301. I mean, this is something we're all Googling and getting up to speed on. But he said ultimately will result in virtually unchanged tariff revenue this year. So it sounds to me like they still expect to get the proceeds. Just 30 seconds left here. You sound optimistic. Does that change any of your optimism?
I think it does not change my optimism. This was a huge win for small businesses. The IEEPA tariffs, those will be refunded. I think going forward, the government will have to use tariffs in a very methodical, programmed, and deliberate way, which they haven't done before. So while some businesses and industries may be tariffed and countries, I think that just the broad-based nature of it will go away, and that is a huge relief for a lot of businesses, and they can start to plan and keep in mind that all the refund money that goes back to U.S. companies and U.S. consumers and will go back into the economy. So I think that's pretty positive.